Mobile hunters, the king of comfort has arrived. Go to tetherednation.com and check out the new Lockdown saddle. Over the past 2 years, Tethered has tested and refined a new approach to their saddle lineup. The Lockdown saddle takes the best-in-class features from the Phantom, like the UtiliBridge, comfort channels, and included an expandable saddle body with their Lockdown link construction to take saddle hunting to the next level of comfort. As if this wasn't enough, they developed Lockdown haulers, which has a slightly rigid internal frame structure, so you can easily unzip, zip, and access haulers with one hand. And if you're a guy like me with no junk in your trunk and have issues with your saddle staying put while you're walking in to hunt, the Lockdown modular yoke solves this problem. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on a gentleman who I learned of him actually through my buddy Johnny Utah, is actually where I found out about this fella. But then I did a little digging, started learning about him and seeing a lot of stuff that we have in common. And then found out not only is he a bow hunter, BJJ practitioner, but he's also maybe like one of the strongest people in the world at one point in his life. And he's also the host of the Peace, Love, and Meat podcast, Mr. Brandon Lilly. What's going on, man?
Not a lot, man. I appreciate it. And I enjoyed the phone call the other day, so thank you for that. Knew this was going to be a pretty smooth, easy conversation to have, on this format. So, yeah, man, it's sorry I missed you the other day, but glad we caught up and got it done today.
Yeah, man. So how are things going, dude? We're in the Christmas holiday. You got the spirit? You all ready?
Man, I don't know. It's Christmas is a little bit different anymore to me just because I think I grew up like a lot of people did, It's a Wonderful Life, White Christmas, all that kind of stuff playing in the background when grandma's cooking over the stove. And really, I still long for those days of what Christmas felt like. And now it just feels so commercialized. I was talking to a guy and he was like, man, I don't even know what Christmas is. I had to wait till Christmas to get my school shoes, and now it's like kids get stuff all year long. So Christmas is just like more of that. And I don't know. I don't know that people are like slowing down enough to really enjoy it. But, I'm going to try to enjoy the things that I get to get into, eat some good food and slow down. That's the number one thing for me is just slow down, enjoy it.
Man, that is truer words maybe have never been spoken, dude. I think, I don't know if it's now because my daughter's a little bit older that we kind of take that approach a little bit. Like my wife, our daughter, she'll get like one kind of main gift or whatever that we kind of get her, that she's really kind of wanting or whatever. And then otherwise, we're lucky where my wife works for the school district. So she's off, between Christmas and New Year's. And then I'm lucky too, just like the company that I work for is like my main job. Like I'm off that same period of time. So we're all off together. And so we've been able just to kind of spend that time together, hang out at the house. We'll go visit some family, but really we just kind of take the time to relax, make a fire in the fireplace, watch some movies together, just, that kind of stuff. And we don't do gift exchange. My wife and I will usually just kind of take a trip in January for like a long weekend to spend some time together. Once the hustle and bustle kind of dies down, hunting season's kind of over for me at that point. So, so I'm around, and we just kind of take off and just get a place that has like a hot tub. Her favorite thing, this is her idea, not mine. She likes to go the weekend of like playoff football so we can sit in the hot tub, drink wine, and watch football on the screen while we're in the hot tub. That's her idea of fun.
Not much better than that. I mean, it's a lady in a hot tub watching football. I mean, that's a pretty good combination right there.
That's right, man. That's right. So, man, so before we jump into hunting stuff, dude, like I want to hear a little bit about the powerlifting stuff, man. Cause like I didn't know that about you when I first learned about you. Like I said, like Johnny Utah kind of introduced me, online to you. Like he was like, hey, we were just actually talking about the podcast and I was just saying, hey, I want to get some guys on that, that hunting is part of their life, in a big way, but like that are more akin to me where it's like, there's this part of me that's very into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So whenever I'm not hunting, I'm really focused on training and doing those types of things. And just guys that have interests outside of hunting that are just diversified. And he brought up your name, and I was like, huh, interesting. And so I hopped on Instagram, kind of found you, started following along, checking out your content, seeing what you were doing, checked out the podcast a little bit, and just kind of followed along on some of the hunts you were going on. And like, I always dig the lifting exercises that you're showing and stuff like that. I'm kind of a nerd for that kind of stuff, like anything that's like training oriented. And then I learned about like your background, right? Of like not only are you like good at training and helping people train, but like you were actually one of the strongest people like on the planet at one point. So how did all that come about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I think for a lot of guys that find themselves in powerlifting, I was a pretty good athlete throughout. My entire childhood, if it was a ball or there was a point that could be scored, I wanted to play. I was super competitive, probably to my own detriment throughout my life. I would identify myself as like so competitive on every front, even with like people that were on my team. And I think I made myself a very challenging teammate. But that led me into a lot of individual sport. I did some swimming and did a lot of other stuff, not necessarily competitive sport, but just individual endeavors. And when I was in high school, I met a coach that really turned me on to lifting. He was kind of helping me through some struggles personally as I'd switched schools and kind of like my junior year, you're a really good athlete. You switch schools, you don't know anyone, kind of on the outside. I also lost my eligibility to play sports in high school because I moved to a different school without moving residence, and they have that transfer law. So that was kind of the ink was drying on that law when I switched. Started getting in some trouble because I didn't have anything to hold me accountable as far as school or sports, because I really only cared about school because of sports, and then I couldn't play. So this guy really introduced me to powerlifting as far as just learning how to train, learning how to translate anger or frustration, come in here and use this as a place to just get it out. And that was all I needed, was just that outlet to continually chase a number or chase reps or sets and get better. Because without that aspect of my life, I kind of revert back to a lesser version of myself. If I don't have something to train for or something to dedicate my focus to, it's kind of like a bored dog. You start ripping apart the pillows and stuff, and that's what I am. I tend to be somewhat self-destructive when I'm not being constructive. And so for me, chasing sport, chasing weights became kind of an obsession. I did some bodybuilding. That was somewhat lackluster for me in the fact that I did really, really good as far as what I was supposed to do. But at the end of the day, your result is judged by, there's an opinion on the table here. It's not a fact. So I started doing some strongman stuff, did really, really well there, and kind of saw the writing on the wall in strongman. I'm 6'2", 6'3", and a lot of those guys at the highest level, Eddie Hall is a perfect example of not, but some of the other guys are getting to be 6'7", 6'8", and then 400 pounds somewhat being the demand for these guys. And, I was 6'3", 275, super explosive, super strong relatively, but mass moves mass. And at some point, as I kept moving up the ranks towards like a national level or a world level, I never did compete at the world level in strongman, but I did at the national. Won a couple of national events and qualified for U.S. Strongest Man. So there was the progression was there, but I also saw that the reality of it was moving to a giant's game. It was becoming a giant man's sport. And powerlifting was actually more accessible to me. I was driving an insane amount of time round trip to do strongman because the only people that had implements lived about an hour or so away from me. So I would go to work for 10 hours, drive an hour down there, train for 2 hours, drive back an hour, and it just a lot of focus and dedication. So when I made the switch to powerlifting, the gym was like 10 or 15 minutes away. And then once again, 2008, 2009, the world and the economy fell apart for a little bit. My world blew apart for a long time. And I was given an offer to train at Westside Barbell. So before I moved up there, and that was at the time, it was like, and it still is, it's like one of the greatest gyms of all time. But at the time, that was the mecca of powerlifting for multiply lifting. And so I was driving, I would leave at 2:00 in the morning, drive 3.5 hours, get there at 5:30, have breakfast with the coach and some of the team, go train at 8, get done by 10, 10:30, just hoe bath myself off, go eat a Subway sandwich, and drive back to get back to work. And I would do that 3 to 4 days a week. I mean, I was driving 7 hours, 3 to 4 days a week to train around the best guys in the world before I moved up there. And I look, and I'm kind of laying the track work here. And I used to tell this as like, man, this is how hard I go. This is how much of a badass I am, because I needed to believe that. But in reality, it was a lot of just desperation to feel something, to pursue something at the level that I believed I could. And, I don't have any irregular belief about myself that I'm better than anyone. But I do believe that I have a certain set of skills that if I apply myself towards the things that I want to do, I can become better than I ever imagined at those things. Not best in the world, not better than anybody else. Like I said, just I know when I put my mind to something, I can achieve it. So my dad used to joke with me. He said, I wish he cared a lot more about being a doctor or making a couple $1 million, but right. I'm just one of those, I'm one of those passion projects guys. Cause hopefully it does come around where I want to make 10 or 15 million, cause I'll probably figure it out. But that's been,
for sure.
My track work has always just been that you might not be tall enough, you might not be strong enough, but you can work harder to get better, and whatever better means. So that's always kind of been how I approach things. That afforded me the ability to keep training with great people and rank myself up all the way through the top. Actually fell when I was ranked. Some sheets said number 1 at the time. Some people said number 3, number 5, number 2. Depending on what metric. But I was a top level competitor. I'll say that. And I had a couple of championships, significant trophies under my belt, and I don't think I ever finished. If I finished a competition, I don't think I ever finished worse than 4th. Once I kind of hit my stride, so it was kind of the glory days for me, where all this stuff that seemingly was so difficult and so hard to achieve was starting to unfold. And right as I was about to, I won't say capitalize, financially, I was doing some seminars and I was doing some coaching. I meant capitalize on actually building somewhat of a legacy that I thought I was going to build. And I thought I would do this until probably right now, about 40 years old. I'm 41 going on 42. But I thought, if I can compete at a high level until I'm 35, 36, 37, and just contribute to the sport until I'm 40, I'll do that. Well, I blew my knees apart in a competition at the Staples Centers in LA. And it literally changed my entire world. One, it deconstructed sense of self, because I thought I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And now I'd lost the use of my legs for a while. I mean, they told me I wouldn't walk for 10 months. So I organized a competition in Australia 10 months to the day after my injury. And that was my goalpost, because I knew if they told me you can't walk for 10 months, I would have believed it. I would have trusted my doctors. I would have thought, man, that's my timeline. I'll be walking in 10 months. So literally the moment the doctor walked out of the room, I put my hands on a chair. I still had nerve blocks in my legs, and I slid off the bed and just stood. And I said, so I'm standing, the next day. And I would like shuffle my feet around. I'm shuffling the next day. So by I was walking very, very quickly. And I think they tell you those things based on the average. And I refuse to assume that I'm the average. So I did arrange for that competition to be a competitor at that competition in Australia 10 months from the day. And I went down there and I squatted 660. I benched 540 and pulled, 700 something. I don't remember exactly what the total was, but, not nearly the numbers that I had put up before I fell, but kind of a statement and proof to self. I actually competed 3 months to the day that I fell in California, in Sacramento, and just did a 100-pound squat just to be like, yeah, but I did pull 700 pounds that day on pretty, just barely cleared knees to do any activity, and I pulled 700. Right. But again, that was a lot of fear of who am I if I'm not this thing? Mm-hmm. And realistically, it made me question, who am I? And mm-hmm. what I was a 340-pound man that was good really at 3 things, and the weight and the strength was a detriment to the rest of my life, whether that was the obsessiveness over training, the obsessiveness over thinking about it when I was around people that, I should have been focused on them. It was just a total distraction for very little reward. I mean, mm-hmm. there's no, if you were building a product or you were building a company or you were building something and there was an equal amount of money going in the bank
Distribution of
account.
like it was helping a
Yeah,
bunch of different people, right?
well, and it was also, it was balancing your life. It allowed you to be
Mm-hmm.
happy, and it allowed you to do these things. And my life was just, it was just go, 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 because, um, man, you see it now. You're a flavor of the month if you're not the flavor of today.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to keep up with the Joneses in a world where you have to prove it on a platform. So I probably overcompeted and got myself into trouble from just a body standpoint. I was broken down, beaten down, before my injury, and then after the injury, I did nothing correctly towards recovery. So I had 19 surgeries on my left knee, just subsequent problems and issues after the fall, infections, things like that. And the infections would lead to necrotic tissue, which led to tendon grafts and replacements and things like that. So I really do have a Frankenstein knee. It doesn't straighten out. I limp. I don't limp, but when I'm lazy, I limp. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
I kind of have to force my knee straight, and I can do pretty good. But if I'm just kind of lazy or I'm comfortable around people, I tend not to notice it, and I limp a lot more. So all my closest people are like, "Are you okay? You're limping pretty bad." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's just because I'm lazy and comfortable around it." So, but yeah, it changed me, man. It really
Yeah.
did, because it very much humanized me again, because I think I was one of the first guys to kind of put myself out there with sharing a lot of the information that I was doing. That obviously led to, hey, we want to have you come to our gym and talk. So I was doing seminars, I was coaching, I was writing an ebook, I was getting paid to compete a little bit, I had some sponsors. So, I was doing all those things right. But as soon as I got injured, the seminars stopped coming, the ebook sales dropped, the coaching, I could kind of massage that along because I'd had those people there and word of mouth was good. But,
Right.
just the aspect of like every sponsor went away. And that's how I ended up working for Sorinex. Was Bert had never been an outright sponsor. I would just call him a supporter. Like, he gave me opportunities to speak. He introduced me to people. It might have been a little money here and there for a competition or a hotel room or something like that. But it was never like an out and out sponsorship. But we had a close enough friendship and relationship that, I wanted to work a job where I could give myself to the job and not be dependent on performance. As in, I have to go compete. I have to
Right.
wear this or say this or whatever. And Bert really, he probably saved my life. I was at a really, really critical low point whenever I did get the job, and probably lower than I would have liked to admit to him in that interview. But I just told him where I was. I said, I just need help. I need to get myself straightened out. I need a job. If that's sweeping floors, if that's calling 200 people a day, cold calls, or whatever you think I can do, I'll do it. And
Right.
he wrote down a number. It paid my bills. It let me put some money in the bank and catch myself up. And to this day, we're 6, 7 years removed from that conversation. It's been a really great thing, and he's allowed me to kind of walk my own walk. I do think I walk to a beat of a different drummer than most at times, but he's kind of embraced that and allowed me to embrace that through Sorinex. So I always try to give him credit for that, because I certainly, the way I felt when he gave me the job, I really do think that I looked at life different after that. Like, now I'm accountable to someone, or something bigger than myself. Because like I said, I've always done really well when I have accountability, when I have something to shoot for, something to strive for. And Bert, being my boss and also being a friend, that was just what I needed at the time. So, that's kind of where I got to get into the outdoor space and all that stuff again, because
Right.
I had been in the outdoors as a kid, never very heavily. My family, not a large hunting background, but I'd shot some deer, rifle style. Just drive around. You got a good flat field in Kentucky. There's a deer. You want to shoot it, shoot it. And it was never like the chase for antlers or shoot a doe, go shoot a rabbit, shoot some squirrels, something like that. But I never had the immersion in deer culture like a lot of Southerners do. I was around it, I saw it, I was interested in it, but just in the household was not the case. And so I was always kind of mentored by other people. I had my first bow when I was a teenager, shot my first deer when I was a teenager with the bow, and then when I was in college, I was a thrower. I was throwing shot put, hammer, and did some discus and some javelin, not much, but nevertheless, that and getting a job after college and all the other stuff kind of took me away from the hunting. And when the injury came, I was looking for that thing that made me feel something. But because I'd been through the industry ringer where I'd had all the sponsorships and I'd had all that stuff, I didn't want to do any of it just to chase an industry. I wanted to do it from a standpoint of like the same thing that powerlifting made me feel. And this is the truth. I actually didn't love powerlifting. I loved the fact that I was good at it, and that got me recognition. So some of the stuff that I went through after my injury was assessing that. Like, would you have gotten hurt? Would you have even competed that day if you weren't trying to prove something to other people or impress other people or keep up with sponsors? So on the outdoor side, I've had to navigate flirting with the industry as an insider from, a working position and knowing a lot of the guys from that standpoint, but also, you understand when you're in the industry that it ain't all pretty either. There's a lot of false people, a lot of fake people. And for me, I have to tread very, very lightly because I am somewhat sharp-tongued and I don't hold back. So I just tend to remove myself from situations or people where I just don't feel like it's a thing for me. I won't say it's good, bad, whatever. It's just not my deal. So that's kind of part of what my job is now, is not necessarily to focus on the people that we work with and maybe the high flyers. But, man, there's probably some guy in Kansas right now that is just an amazing outdoorsman. He's a great proponent for doing it a certain way that you would be proud to talk to your kids about, everything else about hunting that's great. That's that guy. So I like to find those guys and highlight them and talk to them and figure out what they're into. And because it's all part of the same circle, That's it. My buddy Levi Morgan, like, he didn't start out as Levi Morgan. He had to build that. So this guy in Kansas, from a personal standpoint, if I get to know him 2 or 3 years, and then over that course of time, he just really just starts getting known as the guy that puts down giant whitetails, and not because he's hunting precious ground, because he's hunting his ass off.
Right.
I try to find those guys because they belong too. So that's one of the areas where Bird's kind of given me some freedom. It's just go out, find people that interest you, talk to people that you're curious about, and learn about them, and just as it goes, just bring them into the fold. So my job is a lot of different coats on that front. Just learning people, following people, understanding people, trying to find good people.
Yeah, man. Man, you hit a couple different things there. So, like, before I do what I do now for a living, which I work in marketing, as like my day job, and do this podcast. But before that, I was a musician. That's what I did. Like, that was my gig. I grew up, like, there were 3 things I liked doing when I was growing up. I liked playing guitar, I liked hunting, and I liked wrestling. Like, those are the 3 things, right? Funny thing is now I'm 45. It's like what I do in a given day is I play guitar, I do jujitsu, and I hunt. Like, so I've reverted back to like my 16-year-old self, which was probably the truest version of me,
No, that's honestly, man, I think that and I didn't mean to cut you off, I'm terrible about that, but I look at myself, I really do think that I am just a grown version of a kid, and I mean that in the best way. Like, I'm very, very.
It takes a while to get back to there too. You have to get past that whole thing, what you were talking about earlier, where it's like the keeping up with the Joneses thing. Like, that's a real part of life that you have to learn and figure out.
Well, and the thing about me, when I lost my job, it was I was kind of living the American dream. I was working a really great job. I was making just over 6 figures at 25, 26 years old. I'd kind of busted my ass to earn that, and every single aspect of my life, it looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. It looked like the classic Coca-Cola ad. Exactly what you wanted your life to be is what it looked like. And I went to work one day, and I go to log into the computer, and I'm logged out, and they pulled us aside 2 hours later after reassuring us the week before that nothing was happening, everybody was safe. 2 hours later, we find out that we're all being let go in 60 days. So, your life goes from, and that's funny how people look at things. It's like, well, now that I have a house, I will always have this house until I decide not to. Yeah. When I buy this car, I will have this car until I decide not to. I'm making 6 figures. I will always make this until I decide to make more. I will never go backwards. Right. And then in one conversation, all of that is gone. So that really reshifted my mindset about things, because it's like, no, the things you build can be taken away. the things you earn can be destroyed. So I wanted to focus on things that were textural, things that were that mattered more than things, mattered more than money, and that's experience and people. So it kind of led me around in a kind of a Buddhist kind of a way to enlightenment there. It's either Buddhism or the story of Job. Like, we're going to break you down so you understand. But nevertheless, and I don't even think I've been broken down enough because I'm still as stupid as I ever was. But I've always tried to look at my life when there's been big transitions and not just look at like the, oh, woe is me, but more like, how did I get here? What is my involvement in this place? And that's one of those cases, man. I can really tell you, I went to work and did my job, and the economy shifted, and it was over. Like, it crumbled in a matter of months. So I kind of rebuilt my life around, I don't want a whole lot more than I actually need. I don't need a lot of stuff. I need a lot of tools. So like, if you look around here, I mean, I don't want to spin the whole thing, but like, there's like everything on this side of the wall is hunting based. You can see I got my bow case and my bags and everything there, and a couple rifles. Everything extended over here is bow stuff, and then all the training stuff is over here. Right. So it's like, this is the sorry about the noise there, but this is the kind of been where I just built everything to what I wanted it to be, as far as it's a mid-grade, low-grade bow shop, and it's a training mecca. But my house is nothing to write home about. My truck has 450,000 miles on it. But I chose those things, and that's the other thing, is like, I could have more than what I have, but I choose exactly what I have because those things have been selected for purpose, not because I'm trying to impress anybody with it. Yeah,
man, I think that's so important. It's funny because, like, what I was saying previously was just going back to a couple things that you mentioned, was being in music. And kind of like, so I was in love with music when I was a kid, kind of maybe at the beginning how you were in love with powerlifting, because that and wrestling were like two of the things that really kind of saved me. Like, as a young kid, my dad put me in wrestling because I had a lot of family split up, angry youth, that whole thing.
That's why I powerlifted, same kind of stuff, just childhood bullshit. Yeah. And so, my dad was like, we're going to channel you in a constructive way. If nothing else, we're going to tire your ass out, so when you get home, you're not so belligerent, right? Yeah. And so that was kind of how I got involved in both of those to a degree. But the music thing got to a point to where I developed it. I became good at it. It became my job, had a record deal. There was expectation. Now there was other people inside of it, outside of like me and like the guys in the band that were trying to commercialize it. And it started becoming something that it wasn't, or what I never intended it to be. Mm-hmm. And then I grew to hate it, like, to where it's like, I just, it was a job now for me, and I just couldn't stand it any longer. And then I left. And so I'll get asked a lot about the podcast, where, people will ask me if I ever wanted to do this for a living. And I'm always very careful about that, because I'm like, I never say never, but I'm always like, under the right circumstances, I would entertain it, or I could. Right. I was like, but I'm very hesitant to, only because I've taken a passion and turned it into a job before, and I grew to hate it. And it took me a while to find the love for playing guitar again. Like, I completely walked away from it and just didn't even pick one up for the longest time, you know? And I was like, and I know what that's like, and I don't ever want that to happen to hunting, because even running the podcast, it's like, to what you were saying, not keeping up to the Joneses, but like, there's a level of, when you have a hunting podcast, a level of pressure or expectation, or whatever you want to call it. And I would get so filled with anxiety as the season was approaching, but thinking about like the hunts I have upcoming, trying to fill tags and stuff like that. And it was driving me kind of crazy, to be honest. I've mentioned it before on the podcast. And what actually kind of cured me of it was I started training jiu-jitsu. And I got because I love grappling. And so I got so kind of enamored with that all my free time, for the most part, went to that, which I usually would spend that time like on hunting, whether it was scouting, e-scouting, checking trail cameras, doing whatever. And jiu-jitsu actually gave me the space to love hunting the way I loved it at the beginning when I was a kid. Yeah. If that makes sense, right? So this year I had the best season I've ever had, I really think it's because I gave myself the space and the grace to kind of like spend the time on it whenever I really wanted to, as opposed to whenever I felt like I had to, if that makes sense. Oh, it totally does. And I had a clarity moment this year too. It's something that I've talked about with a lot of hunters, but specifically Bert and I've had some conversations about things. And, for no reason, no one calls you and says, hey man, people are watching now. Nobody's nobody tells you that you matter, but for some reason in this space, you start to believe that, oh, I have to kill, or I have to get a big deer, or you start passing deer that you would be so happy with, like yourself. But now it's like, well, like you start seeing that grip and grin before the arrow's even fired or whatever. And man, it just fucking, oh, excuse my language, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it just sucks because that's not what it's about. And this year has bummed me out more than ever when I've read so many captions from people. It's like, well, he's not my biggest deer. Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. You killed an animal. You drew back on it. You either lack self-control or you should be proud of that buck. That's the only two options that there are. He's not bigger than he should be or smaller than he should be. That's what that animal was. And you drew back on it. Like, maybe some of the problems that we're seeing is actually just an unawareness of lack of discipline in rant right there. But nevertheless, for me, I was starting to have those feelings. I was starting to feel that pressure. And actually this year I was put in a position to be successful on an animal that I had no business being successful on. Everything in nature was against me and humans were against me. But and that was what gave me that moment of clarity where it was literally like, man, this is not going to happen. Like, if this happens, like, nobody will believe you anyway. So just do the best you can.
Right.
And that's honestly what broke it. It was like, that's all I can ever do. And I literally had this moment 60, 70 yards from a deer. Like, in my head, I almost started like laughing at myself. Like, you're taking yourself way too serious. Like, everything is working against you and you think you're going to kill this thing. Like, I was already, kind of seeing the moment of like putting the arrow in this animal. And you have to do that some. But like, it just came over me how comical it was to think that whether you're in a tree stand and you've been hunting 20 years or, I'm here 70 yards from this animal, it's like, you never know what the wind's going to do the next second, what that animal's going to do, what that arrow's going to do, what your bow's going to do. I mean, there's 1,000 factors, and all I can control is myself. And that was the clarity that came back this year, was all of this is against me. So just do all that you can. And if you lose, get better. And it sounds so corny and Mr. Rogers, but it was literally like I described it somewhat as a baptism. Just, it felt like a cleansing of all that stress. And dude, my hunting since that time, this season, I've had good, successful like records on the board kind of seasons. But for me, the satisfaction of my hunts since that moment, just through the roof. Yeah. Because there's not a pressure to kill; it's a pressure to be a better hunter.
It's a pressure to experience is what mine has kind of been, right? And the one thing that I kind of picked up on too, or kind of started noticing, was like, and I've talked about this with guys in the past, is just, most guys when they're hunting, and even, I hunt a fair amount, just generally speaking, this season notwithstanding, but, you have X amount of days to be in the field, like between family obligations, work, things like that, like the normal average guy, right? And the ability, I guess, to like, you'll hear people say cliches like, the only way to get better at hunting is to hunt more, right? Or only way to get better at killing deer is to kill more deer, right? It's like, that's the way you kind of get better at it, right? But time sometimes kind of limits that for people, right? And so you kind of maybe academically know it or understand the saying, right? But in practice, you don't feel it because those spurts of doing it come in small chunks and then large amounts of time in between, right? And so that kind of philosophy starts to fall on deaf ears. And I think it did for me too for a long time, until I started training jiu-jitsu, and everybody at the gym would tell you just continually like, dude, just keep showing up. Just keep showing up. Show up tomorrow. Keep showing up. Keep showing up. And you do, right? And because it's like a 3-4 day a week thing, you start stacking those days, those weeks on top of each other. And all of a sudden you look back and you're like, holy smokes, man, like this actually worked. Like the whole idea of just showing up and doing, and being persistent, right? And you have good days, you have bad days, but like you're invested, right? And that investment starts to pay off. And that was like the thing I think that really kind of resonated with me this year, was that like, no, all the time in is what is the valuable part. It's the experience that gets you to like the end of the rainbow, so to speak, right? And it took like a separate of hunting for me to kind of like, I guess, re-experience that, or kind of explore that kind of notion in hunting.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, for me in jiu-jitsu, kind of those moments where, you've worked a position, you've sucked at a position, and then all of a sudden you're in an open mat and you find yourself and somehow you magically do it. And, not because of magic, but because you've failed at it so many times, but in a
Yeah.
live action situation, because I've learned for myself being more of an explosive athlete, um, a lot of the demonstration stuff when I'm very, very slow because of my knee, because I'm 100 years old in dog years, or in lifting years, whatever you
Right.
want to say there. My body, I move really, really well for what it is, but I still have certain limitations. Like I said, with my knee and stuff, there's some
Mhm.
issues there. But um, I will find that when I have momentum, I can do a lot of the stuff, like some of the sweeps and things like that out
Mhm.
of butterfly are a little easier with some momentum. So when I was in butterfly with my left knee, that's the one that tracks bad. Kind of like that, you pin their arm and roll them with the
Mhm.
leg, do the sweep. That was just really, really difficult in slow motion. But that was the way I was forced to go in an open roll, and it worked perfectly. And I was like, okay, I get it. I kind of had a tough training partner with the demonstration stuff, and he wasn't letting me use my leg. He wasn't really
Mhm.
assisting me to get through the movement. But when speed hits, it happens.
Right.
So those little light bulbs, those little glimmers of hope and continuation, I'm always looking for those things, and I'm always willing to understand that. Again, it might be just I had a tough training opponent that day that didn't want to let me kind of learn, or it's just I need to get better. It's one of those two
Mhm.
things, and most
Yeah.
of the time it's I need to get better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm the same, man. I'm the same. It's funny though because it's very similar in hunting, where I think a lot of times guys will get discouraged, maybe because they're not having the success that they want, and they're spending way too much time on social media, seeing what other people are doing, and paying attention, too much attention to that maybe. But they also don't, I think, sometimes realize that just because like something works for one person, and it might be a great idea, or it might be a really sound tactic or strategy or whatever the case is, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for you at all. And if it does, it may not work exactly the same way.
Right.
Right. And I always take like Dan Enfault as like a great example of this, like killed public land for eons, like
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the godfather of like bed hunting, if you will, and stuff like that. Um, but like he and I have talked, and he's like, what he's really doing is providing you a framework about how to think about
Mm-hmm.
finding the deer, and how to set up and where to be looking and how to kind of like read the sign and stuff like that. Not, you shouldn't take what he's doing and say, well, I'm going to do it exactly like that. Right.
Yeah.
He's just more so trying to provide you a really good framework to kind of give you a leg up, from all the failures and mistakes that he made, but doesn't mean that it absolves you of the mistakes and failures you need to make in your own hunts to figure out how it applies to you. And I think that's where
Yeah.
people get discouraged a lot of time, whether it's hunting or even anything else for that matter.
Well, I think transferable information is great, but also experience is the king. And
Mm-hmm.
for example, I was told from social media and every bow manufacturer and arrow manufacturer in the world that, if you can shoot a Copenhagen lid at 70 yards, you can kill any animal on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's true if they're standing completely broadside, standing still, or slightly quartering away. There's no wind, and it's essentially just like shooting your phone target.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming a hunter is doing that on a live animal that's moving and there's conditions. And I became, capable of shooting, let's just say a softball at 75 yards. 4 out of 5 groups, I could hit 4 arrows within
Mm-hmm.
that. So that was pretty consistent shooting at distance. And I would just fail miserably on mule deer. Like I would just get my ass kicked on mule deer. And really, I was kind of at the point of like, man, they lied to me. Like I was kind of at that point. So I wanted to get better as a hunter, and I didn't know how. And lo and behold, I got a recurve. Just kind of a very, very strange scenario that it came to me, but I viewed it as a challenge from the person that sent it. Somebody that was very, very successful with it, and he had no understanding or idea that I was struggling with, like, am I even cut out for this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the recurve did one of two things, and I'll quote Tom Clum Sr. about it. And what was happening with me with the compound was I was becoming such a good focused shooter that, I could ruin a weekend by missing an X, at 25 yards or something like that. I would have my group there, and then I'd have that one flyer, and I would be like, gotta fix it. Right. And it was terrible. And he was like, you go out and you shoot your compound, you hit an X, you're like, yeah, that's what I was supposed to do. You miss it by an inch and you're pissed as hell. He's like, you take your recurve out, you hit the X, you're calling every family member you got in your phone, telling them you hit the X. And he was like, right. As long as you hit the target, you're like, I'll do better next time. So that's a silly way to say it did remove a lot of the pressure, because I had no idea what I could do with this thing. Like, I didn't know if I was going to go, but I did commit. I was like, I'm only going to hunt with this. And I had a trip to Argentina 3 months from the day that I got it. So nice. I kind of had to put the work in there. And then I went to Africa and came back, had a good season all around. But it was not for a lack of trying. I mean, I put the work in to have the confidence to draw the string back. And dude, it forces your hand. You're not going to shoot animals at 40 yards routinely with that thing. And I hear guys that have never killed shit in their life talking about, well, if this thing comes out at 40 or 50, I'm going to smoke him. Well, I talked like that too when I was an idiot, and I'm not saying
that's great. Yeah.
And that's like, you don't know, don't know till you know. But if you're that kind of person, like if you haven't shot an animal or you don't have any experience of it, my deepest suggestion would be that you humble yourself and understand that these things live against all odds, against apex predator type situations all the time. And if you go in there and you can become that, but if you go in there and think just because you can shoot a bow 60, 70, 80 yards, that's somehow going to trump all of evolutionary history as far as, animal biology and survival, that's a problem. Now, take 2 years, and I'm not telling guys that they need to have a recurve to do this, but I took 2 years. I met a very, 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 very successful hunter that he owns aspects of the, I don't want to say what he owns, so I don't want to tell who it is, but right. He owns several companies or products within the outdoor space that a lot of people know of and use. And he's overseas. And the cool thing about him is I hunted with him, and we were hunting stags in Argentina, and I'm thinking he's going to tell me he's going to shoot one, again, 50, 60 yards or meters, as he would say. And I get up to him, and he's like, I haven't shot an animal in 6 years over 25 meters away. And this is a dude that's improving products so people can shoot long distance. But he's like, that's not who I am. He's like, I want to get as close as I can. So he was really the introduction before the recurve that no, the killers get close. Guys will take those further shots if that's the only option. But man, there's some dudes getting close to these animals. So that started to become kind of my interest, and the recurve forced that. So interest meets tool, meets Brandon Lilly, meets let's go down the rabbit hole for all time. And
right. Exactly.
But that's where I've been. It's just, I am a better hunter now than I was 2 years ago. I still don't classify myself as a great hunter, but I've done some things that I would have surprised myself at doing in the last 2 years, just by trying, just by pursuing it,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, man. Cause that's, the whole shot distance thing. I'm always kind of a big, believer. Well, at least this is my approach. I typically, even with a compound, it's I don't take a shot over 30 yards. Just because
you're a better man than me.
There's just because there's, especially, and some of it might be just historically where I hunt, just because it's very thick timbered, a lot of kind of swamp areas and stuff like that, whereas I don't get very many clear opportunities beyond even 15, 20 yards. Every deer I've killed, the deer I killed in Kansas is probably the furthest I've shot a deer in probably 10 years, and that was at 27 yards. It's most everything else has been within 15 yards and under.
No, I agree with that. I was just giving a shit. I think the furthest I've ever shot a whitetail buck was 41 yards, and it was a unique opportunity too. I was with my compound. I was in a tree stand, rolling hills. It was kind of one of those deals where there was a dip between us, very small but shallow kind of dip between us. And then he was on another finger. And the way that my tree was positioned, we were almost kind of at the same eye level. And he was walking up that ridge line, and he was silhouetted. like perfectly silhouetted. The sun was kind of shining in across his back. I mean, it was just like a spotlight on this deer at 41, 42 yards. And, just put the pin right there, made a really good shot. Actually, one of the most impressive blood trails I've ever seen. Not to diminish the deer's life, but this thing jumped between a forked tree, and the arrows, the entry and exit, were just on the front end. So all the pressure of his weight was just, he was just hemorrhaging outside both of the trees. The picture of that is like, it's just unbelievable what these animals, when they get shot, how much they bleed. But that was the furthest I've ever shot a whitetail, was 41. And again, I've always had the opinion that, like, there's been some animals I would have shot at 41 yards that when they got a little bit closer, I'm like, I'm glad I didn't, because every deer looks gigantic from behind. Man, you just observe so much more behavior. In 20 yards, from 40 to 20, you're going to learn way more about deer than you will from 200 to 40. Like, that's one of the most interesting things that I've found is what happens inside of, I could have shot him right there versus I'm choosing to shoot him right there.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that is what, to me, as a lifter, I said, younger lifters, inexperienced lifters react to what lifting is. Like, when they go down with the bar, they're just like, oh shit, hold on, let's go up. Right. A seasoned lifter or a veteran will say, okay, I've unracked the bar, I'm stepping back, I'm controlled, I'm tight, I'm going down, now I'm going up. Like, it's a very, like, I am deciding what to do with this bar. And that's the same thing that I'm striving to do in hunting, is like, oh shit, there's a deer, I'm going to draw back and shoot because I can. It's like, well, maybe because you can doesn't mean you should. Maybe there's going to be a moment 5 minutes from now where he's in a better shot and you have a better angle and he's like whatever, but you don't know until you try. But I think people that rush to get the first opportunity to shoot a deer, that's maybe not the best way to learn, because you're not giving yourself time to learn animal behavior.
Yeah, that's such a good point, man, because I've made that point just about
all of these mistakes are mine. I've made them all.
100%, man, 100%. That's like the only way I've learned it is because I've screwed it up,
Yeah.
And that was one of the big things in terms of like hunting places like Iowa or Missouri and Kansas and stuff like that, and just being around mature deer and getting to observe. And like you said, like seeing them maybe from 60 and then working their way to 35 or 25, and I still didn't get a shot or whatever the case is, but I got to watch them for 5 minutes and just like watch their behavior, how they interact with other deer. Like, you really learn a lot about how they navigate landscape, how they kind of react to each other. You can tell a lot about their, just kind of like their personality if you see a deer, over, multiple times over. But, the hunt in Kansas, like the past couple years, has been really, I think, eye-opening for me, to where I think like this year's success that I had is attributed to being willing to let the deer kill itself and me not trying to kill it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it was learning that, and that's a very jiu-jitsu thing, right? It's like you let the trap and let them hang themselves out to dry. You know what I mean? That's what the good guys do, right? It's like, I'm not there. I can do it once in a while, but like, whenever when I roll with the guy, like some of the black belts at the gym, it's like, I know enough now to know that they're setting a trap and I shouldn't take the cheese, but I need to figure out what's going to happen next. You know what I mean? So I take the cheese anyway. It's kind of the same thing. And that's kind of what taught me that, was like, man, they're going to make the mistake if you let them. If you played your cards right and you're set up correctly and you're playing the wind correctly, and you're kind of tucked in, whether you're in an elevated set or whether you're on the ground or whatever the case is, if you've done your due diligence and your strategy is on point, that deer should make the mistake to kill himself. You shouldn't have to force him.
Well, there's an old timer that gave me a quote. Man, I put it in my story not too long ago, but he was talking about how he observed this mountain lion chasing, I want to say it was a mountain goat, and more or less this lion was emaciated. It was starving. He said, this is all just my perception of the situation, but he said emaciated, ribs showing, and he got to within 15 yards and just watched this thing move. The lion, it didn't pounce, it didn't attack. It just watched this thing for an extended period of time until that thing was 2 steps, a bound, and a neck bite away from its own death. And that was the thing, is it's like, how many people hungry would have made the mistake and missed their dinner. And that's what he said. After that, he said, I was so inspired by that lion's commitment to getting the kill, not just being in place to kill. And he was like, that's me. I don't want to get close to kill. I want to get close to choose when I take my shot and kill this animal, because then I'm in control of myself. I'm in the favor of the natural elements. The wind is in my favor. My silent, my scent, all these things, like everything is in my favor. I just have to execute when I choose to execute. And I think a lot of people have gotten themselves into a point where they get so excited. And it's also bastardized by the industry. You see these jackasses like they've never shot a deer before, and they've shot 16 200s on the wall or whatever.
Right.
Like, when you act like it's the first deer you've ever shot in your life, I don't understand that stuff. But nevertheless, I think people, they see those people doing those things, and it's like that amps them up because, like, it could be me. It could be me. Like, I could be this.
Right.
And instead of, by your DNA, you are a hunter. By evolution, you are a hunter. Like, you were made for this. You just have to figure out how to tap into that. And from everything I've seen, it ain't that way. Like, it's not getting all amped up and jacked up and whatever. It is trying to get yourself into a reduced stress state where you have full awareness of what you're doing, why you're doing it. And that's what I'm talking about. These people that are like, well, I thought he was bigger. Well, why did you shoot? Why did you draw back a 75-pound bow, anchor, put your peep on your sight, put the sight on the animal, look at him, and then shoot if he wasn't what you wanted? Like, have some more discipline. I'm again, end of rant. Yeah. But it's just one of those things that bugs me, because it's like you're blaming the animal for your inability to control yourself.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, what are you really saying when you say that?
Right. Or
yeah. Like, I thought he was bigger. Well, it's his fault, not mine. No. Right. Dumbass.
Right. No, I mean, dude, you're hitting the nail on the head, man. And I think it's, you always hear of people kind of saying, like, they, when they take the shot, that's like, I don't remember anything. I blacked out. Right. Like, you hear that a lot. Right. And some of it is like, some people just don't deal with stress well. You know what I mean? Like, some of it's that, right? Some of it is because, to your point, the person is just being undisciplined, and like, then they walk up on it, it's like, and then they're like, oh, ground shrinkage, right? Or something like that, right? Because it's not exactly what they wanted, and if you actually take your time and you get close and you watch, I used to feel like, for years, when that happens, that actually my anxiety would go up. It's actually the opposite. As it gets closer, my anxiety goes down.
Same.
Because I feel like, as it's getting closer, the percentage of me actually releasing the arrow and it being fatal is increasing with every step that deer's taking toward me.
I feel like every time that deer comes closer, I'm winning the chess match.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because at 35, 40 yards, that deer may not even come into me. So, the anxiety is a little bit high. Like, I'm a little bit tense. But exactly like you said, I have a point in my brain, same when I did when I lifted. I could laugh and talk to people at the scorer's table, or have a drink of Gatorade, be talking to somebody at the chalk stand. But when I took that mental cue that I am the next lifter, like, I knew how to control that. And I credit a lot of that towards my hunting success, because I've been in very, very high stress sports level and or in competition level with high stress, and learned how to manage that and mitigate that and overcome that. And if you're not asking yourself to, you never will. And that was something that I struggled with when I was younger. Like I said, I shot early. I shot deer that I'm looking at like, man, I thought he looked bigger. Well, he looked bigger to you because you wanted him to be bigger. You're not really taking him in for what he is. Yep. And it's like the girl in the bar at 2:00 when you're slam drunk. She looks a lot better till the lights come on. It's like right. That's what it is. That's that moment of clarity, because now your senses are back, because you're really thinking about it. So I think if you can imagine, when you're in that stand, the first victory is getting him close. And then the second victory is getting him close enough to understand what he is and deciding if that's what you want. And then the final victory, of course, is harvesting and killing the animal, or harvesting the meat and killing the animal. But I don't want to bash anybody that's there as like, you're wrong, because like I said, everything I'm telling you that I would assume maybe not do, or prefer that you maybe not do, I have done over and over with regret and mistake. So I'm coming from a place where the way I hunt now makes me feel better. Like you said, I don't have as many shots that are astray, or I made a bad shot. I'm very seldom going to make a bad shot at 12 yards.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if I'm making bad shots at 12 yards, what am I even doing?
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's important to what you said there, where you have to realize the victories like at each step, right?
The problem
like,
is the industry doesn't pay for those moral victories, you know?
I
And that's
know.
the
And that is, dude. Like, and I've said, like, I've talked to my buddy Tony Peterson about this. Like, he is one of like, he's like one of the best dudes that's in the industry, in my opinion. I mean, he's a hell of a hunter, but he's also just a guy who does it the right way. He thinks about things the right way. And he always has like hunting's best interests in mind, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and he's very much an advocate of, you know, celebrating those victories. Cause look, I had a couple of years where I just had a bad run where it's like, I was getting close to deer, you know, and I hunt Pennsylvania, right? High pressure state, you know, there's
Sure.
it's all public land. So it can be challenging, you know, to say the least. And we would talk, and it's like every year he's like, dude, he's like, you're having an encounter in bow range every year with like 2 to 3 shooters, like public land in Pennsylvania. He's like, that's winning, dude. He's like, you know, he was like, even though you haven't let an arrow go, he's like, sure. He's like, you probably could have took a bad shot if you really wanted to release an arrow. He's like, and maybe one of them, you know, maybe you kill one of those deer, you know?
Sure.
He was like, and so it's like, for me, it's like, I started reframing success. And I think you have to do that, whether it's hunting, whether it's like relationships, whether it's jujitsu, whether it's lifting, right? Because how many times have you gone into lift when you were, you know, getting ready for a competition, or maybe you're trying to increase your weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the victory at the end of the day is you're trying to hit a certain number, right? But you're not going to go from like where you're at today to that certain number in one day.
No.
Like, you've got to have the victories in between. You got to have the wins in between, right? And it's the same thing in jiu-jitsu. It's like, I'm not going to go from being a blue belt to a purple belt in a month. Like, it's going to be years, and I've got to have victories in between, like wins in between. And there's going to be a lot of failures, but there's going to be wins in between. And I got to recognize some of those things that aren't as glamorous as getting a new belt or hitting your PR or putting that deer on your wall. Like, there are wins there that you need to recognize, because it builds confidence, which then ultimately builds your ability to hold steady in those moments of truth, right?
Yeah.
Whenever the animal gets close, and now the anxiety is gone, because you don't look at everything through the lens of like, I lose unless I do this final step.
Well,
right?
I'll tell you what, man, one of the things that, you know, helped me was I really started trying to be a little bit more understanding of what I was thinking when I would have those reactions, or I would, you know, build up something where I would get so just wound up and bound up that it almost, I mean, I'm talking from a place that I understand, you know, and I'm not saying I'm invincible to these problems in the future. I think everybody is susceptible to those things at certain times, but I try to be aware of them. I try to look at myself in a way that, you know, how do I want to present this forward? You know, would I want other people hunting the way that I hunt? Would I want the industry to have its magnifying glass on the way I'm hunting and be like, man, maybe that is better, or maybe that is a little bit different than what we're doing. Maybe there is something to be gained there. And I think that's really what it's going to take from all hunters, is it's not just you and I telling one story as better or worse. It's more like, this is how I do it, and that's a part of how it's done. As you know, there's always going to be guys like Levi Morgan and Cam Haynes and John Dudley. There's always going to be that top tier name that are out there. And I can tell you for myself, like, I haven't had a bad thing in the world to say about Levi, and the other two, Cam and John, I just haven't been around them enough to really form like dedicated opinions. They were friendly, you know what I mean? But I've had I've been to Levi's house and I've done his podcast and stuff. Levi would be a shining example of high achievement in the sport. Like, I can't say a bad thing about that guy or what he does for bow hunting, but there's a lot in between me and him, you know, or you and him, or you and I, or even anything. Like, just some of the places that the industry's going, I don't understand necessarily, but, you know, I'm not going to be the one that changes it. I might just be a part of a group of people that do things a little different.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the idea of like leading by example, right? And you hopefully that the people that you have the sphere of influence over, that they recognize the example that you set, you know, and that they are like, hey, he's doing it the right way. Like, I want to do it the right way too. Or,
well, I don't even know if I want to classify it as the right way. Like,
that's a bad choice of words, maybe, but you get what I'm saying. But
I wasn't putting that on you, because I've said it myself, and again, I'm trying to be conscious of that, because you know, it's more like I'm doing it a way that is familiar to ways that it's been done for a long time, and I'm trying it out. Like, just for example, you know, I used to think camouflage was like, it just made you invisible. And, there is a lot to be gained from camouflage in the right setting. There's a lot to be gained from solids in the right setting. Early season, sitting up there with something that's got a lot of green in it and whatnot with the leaves around you, perfect. When you're sitting out there in the middle of December and it's bright green and you're sitting in a hollow tree, with no leaves on it anywhere, you kind of stick out. So I'm kind of wearing some of the stuff I wore recently when I shot that turkey. Brown shirt, brown pants, green vest, green hat. That is a better camouflage late season for me, and where you're hunting and what the surroundings are like. So I think that the industry could do a better job of just educating honestly, because the camo companies don't tell you that, hey man, sometimes better if you use the solid, and the guys pushing the solids are like, hey, maybe you need camo every once in a while. Like, if everybody would just tell the truth, it would be awesome.
Yeah, man. I mean, dude, you could make a freaking shirt out of that, and everyone should wear it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, across every sector of everything.
Like, people would tell the truth, it would be awesome. Just that's the whole shirt,
bumper sticker, shirts. The whole nine, man. The whole
coffee
nine.
Mugs are coming for Christmas.
Yeah, coffee. Yeah, for sure. That's awesome, man. But no, I mean, I think we're kind of at this weird inflection point. Like, I sometimes think about it and I get bummed out about it a little bit sometimes, when I think about it too hard, because I just feel like, I used to feel like hunting was like this separate entity that kind of, operated in not the hunting industry, but hunting. So like separating the two, right?
Yeah.
Like operated in this little area of its own that didn't really take a lot from, like, I'll say pop culture for lack of a better way to say it, right? Like, it wasn't influenced by mainstream and things like that. It was like this really honest, and that was maybe my own, me being naive, maybe, early on, and like, the more I look at it now, like, I'm, and look, I'm probably part to blame for it. I have a podcast, right? Like that's, it's the reality of it. But I look at some of like the media kind of component of it, if you will, and I'm having a hard time like deciphering how it's that much different than like Paul, I think this is his name, Paul Logan's podcast or whatever, right? I'm seeing so many like similarities where it's all like clickbaity bullshit, you know what I mean? Like, and I get it, like, if that's how you're making your living or whatever, and you're trying to get eyeballs on it and stuff like that. But like, there's just part of me that's like, cause even when I was in music, like part of the rift I always had with like management and stuff like that was like, I wasn't a clickbaity person. Like, I wasn't going to do things because they thought it would make me look cool. Right. Like, I wasn't interested in any of that. I wasn't interested in like, we'd get done with a show, for example, right? And they would always want us to go out to like a table and like sign autographs and stuff like that. And I hated it. I could not stand it. It wasn't because I didn't appreciate people, but my whole idea was, I'm no different than you. Like, if you want to do this too, go get a guitar, put a band together. And if you put some work into it, in a couple years, you could be on the same stage.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like how I always thought about it. And I kind of feel the same way about hunting, but I feel like there's like this gap that's kind of like being created to a degree.
Well, one thing I'll say about that is, when I would be at a powerlifting meet and like somebody would ask me to sign their belt or sign something for them or whatever, I always genuinely enjoyed that, because it was a person coming to me, like, because it was me. I feel like a lot of times when it was the table situation, it was just somebody that was like, oh, there's a person here and they're signing stuff, I'm just going to get it signed. And not that it wasn't the same kind of interaction, but one felt very staged and one felt very organic. Even if it was the same line of people in both situations, one felt very like,
one was promotional.
Because
that was my thing. You know what I mean? Because I would have like, if it happened somewhere else or whatever, or even if it was at the same venue, we got done playing, because this has happened, and someone cut up to me in the parking lot or something like that. Like, totally cool, right? And I would stop and have a conversation with that person. But like, at the table, it was so transactional, because it literally, like, there'd be people standing there and it'd be like, here, let me sign this. All right, next, sign this.
Yeah, you don't get the conversation with it. It's like, where are you from? Thanks for coming. Have a great day. See you later. Bye.
Right. Because if they want to ask me about something about the song, like, hey, pick up the record and like this guitar tone you have, like, how did you get that? Like, I'm a nerd. I'd be like, oh man, I was using this amp with this guitar, and like, and I'd break it down for them, like, and literally have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And the other way just felt so cheap, and it felt like I was just like a commodity, and I was trading my time for like their like thinly veiled interest. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
And I feel like sometimes like hunting kind of feels the same way. Like the whole idea of hunting celebrity makes me, I mean, there are famous people in hunting. I don't have any quibbles with that. But the idea of a hunting celebrity makes me feel weird.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I want to ask you about too. So let's say, like, I don't know, we'll just use a hypothetical. We'll use a guy that's still doing it, but he's been around forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Adams, let's just say him, for example. If you go back to 1980 and he says, you know what, I'm going to kill one blacktail a year and I'm going to kill one whitetail a year. And I mean, he just kills giants. Let's say that's it. That's all he does. He kills 2 a year. Does he become Chuck Adams?
Probably not.
Okay. So by default, just your kind of awareness and my awareness is you have to put a lot of animals on the ground to achieve that status. So unless you're like somebody that, well, I can't think of anybody that's a celebrity that's just killing 1 or 2 animals.
No,
so the demand by default would be, drowning pool kicks in, let the bodies hit the floor. It's
right.
like it's got to be that. So if you have someone that's killing, let's say 12, 14 animals a year, and that's becoming like the standard, well, you're already seeing it. More guys are getting into pig hunting now. More guys are going overseas now, because now they're not just hunting September to December. They're hunting all year long. Again, raising my hand, I've hunted internationally and I will be again. But I'm not under a demand to perform necessarily. And I think that's what happens is these companies get so cutthroat. I think that's why guys get the inclination to poach. And again, I don't think everybody that has poached is a poacher. I think that there are some poachers that are outright poachers from birth. They just have that mentality. But I think there's been a handful of guys that have probably, this is my final year under contract, I need to have a good showing, and that deer's on the side of a fence 3 feet from legal boundary.
Right.
I mean, we have baseball players that took steroids when that was legal. As a man talking to that person, I can understand his rhetoric, and it's just 3 feet on an imaginary line. Well, that imaginary line is a property line, and that's no longer imaginary. But nevertheless, I think the industry has done a terrible job of making a guy that could, like my buddy Logan, he kills 1 deer a year. And he always specifically hunts a really nice trophy-style Tennessee deer. He killed a 190 Cryptorchid buck down there not too long ago. But, so it's like, does the industry speak to him? Does the industry care about him? Because he's only killing 1 animal. And the industry elite is killing 10, 12, 15. Now, like I said. So
and on film. That's the other kind of like criteria now too, right? Like that's the other.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is like I don't film my stuff. I had the one situation where I filmed with Levi, and I thought that was great. Like he was awesome, and that was situational because Mike is amazing. Hunter Phelps and Joe Cadle, those guys were kind of our film team. They were already guys that I knew and liked. Like they were already people I was cool with. So it was a little different situation. But the demand now is you have to film it. It has to be a big animal, and you have to get a lot of them. And from somebody that's wanting to get into the industry, they're looking at it like, man, I've got to hunt a lot more than I am, rather than, man, I killed 1 great whitetail this year, or I killed a really good doe this year, and I got some meat for the freezer. Like, there's not enough people that are just connecting with the blue-collar hunter anymore. They're just not from an industry standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think
I would agree.
I think that's becoming a problem, is that it's damaging the psychology of the new hunter. Like I had a guy come into a hunt camp one time, and he's like, I'm not shooting anything unless it's over 150. And the guy that owned the outfitter looked at him and he said, well, you're not going to shoot anything unless a miracle walks out of that woods, because we have never seen a 150 on this property. And that's, so it's like, okay, game on. What is a good deer on your property, sir? Well, a 120 would be exceptional. Okay, if I kill a 115 to 120 buck, I have done right by your property. I can handle that.
Yep.
But a guy goes and posts that, that shoots, that's got some shooting pressure on them as far as like from an industry standpoint, that story doesn't matter. That there aren't 150s there. Well, why are you hunting there if there's not 150s there, dumbass?
Right. Yeah.
So even in that situation, these guys are under pressure. And again, I wouldn't envy it. I don't want to be in their shoes, and I don't want to have to juggle the things they do. I just feel for a lot of the guys because I know the pressure is immense.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, my take is always that wherever I'm going, my goal is always to just try to kill. And notice I say try, right? Because it's like, it's hunting. And I've eaten tags in pretty much every state I've been to, right? Like at one point or other. And I always kind of look at it like I would like to shoot first and foremost something that gets me excited when it comes in. You know what I mean? Where it's like my heart jumps, you know? And then the second one is a mature representative animal for that area, right?
Yep.
So, and that's only because like I would prefer to kill as mature of an animal as I possibly can, just from a respect for the resource more than anything. Not that it needs to be a certain size or anything like that. That's always kind of been my kind of criteria, and regardless of like how big it is, that's not necessarily. And I think you're right, man. I think people do get hung up on that. It's like, I want to shoot a 150. It's like, I do think that people who hunt in states, say like you go up to the Northeast, right? Like you get into like New Hampshire and Maine and stuff like that. I mean, like you don't see giant, but I mean, body wise, they get big up there just because as you go north, body size gets bigger because of harsher winters, et cetera, right? And usually that means more resources are going to like preserving their body, which means antler size usually goes down proportionally, right? With that in a lot of cases, like those guys up there, if they're just getting into hunting, you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of big deer, right? Yeah. And you're following whatever Instagram and you're following whatever podcasts or hunting shows on YouTube or whatever, and you're seeing them kill on film deer all across the Midwest that are of a certain caliber or whatever. All of a sudden, you have a very skewed view of what realistic is, right? And now you go out and you're disappointed because like, well, I'm not seeing any deer like that. I don't have deer like that on my trail cameras, and it's just not a fair way for that person to kind of look at what their hunting opportunities are.
Well, that's what I mean. I just wish it would, for me, I'm just going to be the asshole that says the industry should change for me. But this is what I would like to see. I would like to see, a guy. I enjoy seeing the farm development. I like seeing how a guy works the farm. I like seeing how a guy, where he does his food plots, what kind of food plots he wants to run, why he wants to run them, how he runs river systems or creek systems. Just, I enjoy that aspect of it. It's educational. It really does inform. I would like to see some of that from the guys. I would like to see them, talk about this property, is a growing property. We just don't have those big bucks yet. So these are the ones that we're looking out for. Maybe they take a cull buck. Maybe they take a few does. That's the reality of hunting, but nobody shows anything but the big horns. And
right.
I don't know if that makes me sound like a crybaby or not. Like, obviously I love to see that stuff. I have some nice horns here myself, but I think if we really want to preserve what hunting is as a endeavor, a lifelong endeavor, let's say, I think we need to get back to telling the story of, rifle kills with does as a child, and then moving up to your first buck, and then, weaving that into, maybe that comes into archery, maybe that comes into a crossbow or a stick bow or whatever it is, but just show it as a lifelong approach of evolution. Like, there's so many people going out now, their first deer, like I said, they're expecting a giant, or they go out west and they're like, here's a 280 bull. Well, I thought, big's at 350. You know what I mean? Like, they've just heard these numbers so many times.
Dude, that is so true, man. They've just heard these numbers, right? And there's no context for like what it actually means, man. That's like, you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Well, it's like if I showed anybody this elk over here that I got at Big Chino, it's oohs and ahs, but then I say, tell me what it scores. Somebody that's in the know can probably tell you, but anybody that's never killed a deer or elk before, that elk is just going to be massive. They would think that it was a 400 if I told them it was a 400. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that number doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. So why does it mean anything?
Right.
Like, we get so caught up in that. And I think that,
And I think people should embrace like the beginning stages, man. You know what I mean? Like that's yeah.
I'll say this one thing. I saw a very, very, very big name reply this way to a comment one time. This guy said, "Hey, bud," I'm using Bud as his name. He said, "Hey, bud, right. I killed my first deer. It was a whitetail, and it was a doe. I used it, or I used this and this, some product the guy was endorsing. He said, I used this and this. Thank you so much. Hey, one quick question. Do you ever kill females?" And he replied back, "I kill big bucks." And that's it. Like, not congratulations, not anything. It's like, I kill big bucks. God, it's like, what a fucking douchebag. Make me want to throw up,
dude. Yeah, there, dude.
Just a loser. But, like, this is probably, one of the top 10 names in the hunting industry that could have really maybe impacted this person. Like,
100%,
awesome job on your doe. So glad, thankful that you chose these products. It really helps us out. Whatever it is, like, there's 10,000 ways to answer that question. And the information that person will deduce from that is that his doe means nothing, and if he doesn't kill bucks, it means nothing.
I know. And like, one of my favorite things is, man, when I get messages from guys that listen, or women that listen to the podcast, that killed their first deer, doe, buck, whatever it happens to be, man. Like, and I don't feel like I help them do a whole hell of a lot of anything, but they listen to the podcast and maybe they've gotten something from it at some point. I'll be like, hey, the podcast has really helped me out. I killed my first deer this year with a bow. And I'm always like, dude, that's awesome. Like, cause that is hard to do, man. Like, killing deer is not easy to do, right? No. Like, if it were, everyone would go out and fill a tag every single year, right?
Yeah.
And you should be super stoked on that deer, whatever it happens to be, right? Yeah, I mean,
that's been the biggest upside to the traditional side is the only really reason I visit Facebook at all anymore is there's 2 traditional archery groups that I'm a part of. Now, you start talking trad vanes versus feathers or carbon versus wood or all that, you'll get a shit show. Yeah, it'll be a war.
Right.
But if somebody shoots a spotted fawn,
right,
98% of the people are going to be like, "Congratulations, man! I know how hard that is." Like, whatever. Yeah. Like, they're not looking at it discerning. I mean, there's probably going to be somebody say, "Probably could have let the spots come off," but
right.
But for the most part, like, anybody can post a doe or a rabbit or a squirrel, whatever it is in there, and everybody understands the weight of that kill because it's so challenging, but that's the thing is that sometimes the compound makes you forget how hard killing an animal really is, and it becomes like, oh, I can do this. Dude, I can tell you with 100% of certainty, when I go in the woods with my stick, there's no doubt that I can shoot a straight line. I never know that I'm going to kill that animal until it is piled up on the ground. You know what I mean? Like, with a compound, I do have that feeling sometimes that I have to remove. I have to get that out of my head. Like, I am capable, but you can also get overconfident too. You can make bad shots or take those, oh, he's in that clearing, I'm going to get him.
Well, I mean, you start to take things for granted. You know what I mean? Like, I certainly did this year, even just like with my compound. Like, I had a shoulder injury that I had a torn labrum and then I separated my AC joint, and it was right before hunting season, and I'm still doing physical therapy for it now, but I got to the point to where I could shoot my bow. And it was, you talk about, like, I used to feel like I could layer an arrow in anywhere I needed to drop one. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if I needed to shoot around obstacles or split 2 limbs or whatever, like, I felt like I could do it. And then all of a sudden going from there to where it's like, I went through a stretch where I couldn't even pull my bow back, or my shoulder was so banged up, I couldn't even like hold the bow out in front of me, to where like drawing and then shooting, and I had to drop my bow down to like 48 pounds just so I could like draw and shoot for a while. And it's like, it was humbling, to where it's like, I was like, man, I do not take for granted any longer being able to sling an arrow. You know what I mean? It's like, and there was a point in time where I was like, dude, I don't know if I could actually kill an animal with this bow. Like, I just don't know that I feel confident enough to do it. And then over time it comes back, and then the appreciation for actually being able to do it was immense. So not the same as traditional equipment, but definitely struggling with, I took it for granted for a long time, then it was taken away from me, and you're like, oh man, like,
yeah. Well, the thing about it is, one cool thing I learned from traditional archery is like, you can rig probably a 48-pound compound to be successful to kill. Because one of the big discrepancies in speed, you're talking 265, 285, 300 type ranges for feet per second on a compound. The fastest I'm ever going to touch with any of my bows, and these are 59, 57 pound bows, is a low 180s.
Right.
So if we can figure out, and again, this is a whole different conversation, the FOC stuff and head weight versus tail weight and all that. But I know a couple kids that have killed deer with sub 50 pound bows, just through doing research, trying to figure out what's going to work best for them and whatnot. And I actually came across this guy. He was a kid from Sling Blade. Remember that kid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's got a YouTube channel, and he hunts up hill, and he's got his boys hunting. And his kid had like a 28, 30 pound draw weight bow, but he had 350 grains in the front of this arrow. So, he's got one pin. He's got a 20-yard pin, and that's it. And the deer came in, he smoked it, absolutely killed it. So that would be the transfer on that. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm interested in, is how can I make myself better? How can I learn and build and touch my own equipment? Because for so long, I just had somebody that built the compound, put the strings on it, whatever, and I shot it. So as I've gotten deeper into this, I've wanted to learn more about it. I've wanted to be, like I said, I like textural things that I can put my fingerprint on and say, this happened because I did that. And that's the confidence that I take into the woods, is like, if this arrow fails, I built it. Blame yourself. If this bow comes apart, you didn't construct it, but I put it together. I strung it, everything else. If it fails, you did that. So I like the aspect of putting as much ownership on myself. I'm not shooting a broadhead that I haven't sharpened. I'm not screwing it on unless I'm using some kind of like tack adhesive, something that'll actually, it won't spin in the end. I build those arrows to kill. And when they don't, or if they fail or I fail, it all comes back to me. And I guess that's just what I want. I want as much fingerprint on my hunting experience as I possibly can put on it.
Right. Well, speaking of getting better, man, I know I've held up your time here on a Friday afternoon before a holiday. I got jiu-jitsu open mat this evening that I got to get ready to go try to, go get beat up by some of the more advanced guys. But man, I thoroughly love this hangout, dude. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad we finally got to meet. You got an open invite anytime you want to come on this show, dude. You're good people. I dig chatting with you. And before you run out of here, though, let people know where they can find out more about you, follow you, and anything that you have going on that you want to make them hip to.
Yeah, I think number one thing is Brandon Lilly 3 is kind of my constant on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I'm not really active on Facebook, but I am on Instagram. But more Peace, Love, and Meat is the alternate account. I have a podcast there. I post free training, journal prompts, nutrition ideas, food ideas. And all of that is a free resource, because I just wanted to have a place that if somebody had a hurdle, I don't know how to train, well, here's free training. I don't know how to eat, well, here's some nutrition advice. I don't know what to write in my journal. So anything I can do to help anybody without a barrier of entry. Like, it's just a great place to get some info and share ideas. But yeah, really, just get in the woods. That would be my biggest encouragement to all. Don't find me, find the woods.
There you go. Great advice, brother. Hey, man, I appreciate you coming on, buddy.
Anytime, man. Thank you.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible: Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.